Well, I'm here today with Dr. Ron Paul, champion of liberty, who's been a big influence in my own work and the development of my ideas and my columns and our radio program, A Neighbor's Choice. And it's great to have you on. It's just right after 4th of July, Dr. Paul.
Very good. Nice to be with you again, David.
Yes, and I wanted to kind of set the table here because, one of the things that's on the minds of a lot of Americans right now, of various political, ideological backgrounds, is justice. And how should we do our policing? How should we deal with the issues of justice in this country? Here we are, just off of our celebration of the Declaration of Independence. And I spoke with a co-host of the Breakfast Club, which is a popular radio program. Her name's Angela Yee, and I told her, I said, I think if people had paid attention more to Congressman Paul's claim that we should pardon all nonviolent offenders that are in federal prison, that we would be a lot farther along in justice right now if we had taken up something like that. What do you think?
Well, let's hope so they'll come around to it. They've inched in that direction because I can recall when I first went to Congress in the 70s, the war on drugs was much more vicious than it is now, even though it's still a mess. But people would go to prison for smoking one joint and all this. So yes, the whole principle of nonviolent crimes is not true. Most of that should be considered a vice, as Lysander Spooner pointed out. Vices aren't crimes. Vices are dangerous, but they're only dangerous to the people that do it. So to accept this principle, you have to accept the principle of self-reliance, self-responsibility in a free society. But if you want less people in prisons and less policemen marching around spending a lot of money and causing black markets to occur and many other complications, it would be a much better world. But the problem is that for a long time they've done this, and then we have shifted from the Constitution's direction that policing isn't really a federal matter. They didn't say, well, we have to have local policemen for the whole country to make sure people behave our edicts. And unfortunately, we have ended up with a lot of policemen out of Washington. I think it's, probably 150,000 or more bureaucrats who carry guns. And they're not enforcing violent crimes. They're enforcing regulations. They write regulations, they enforce them. So it's a real mess and continues to be. And then now we are living in a society where they're all mixed up, where certain groups think that you should give a pass to other groups who do violent things, even committing crimes of property damage and injury and killing and all this. Oh no, if you're an illegal alien and they slap your wrist and they turn you loose again, they are back committing crimes again. At the same time, the prisons might be filled up with people committing nonviolent crimes. So yes, I think it's a mess, and I think we could do a lot to improve on it.
What do you think of the calls to defund the police? Do you think those are rooted in a libertarian instinct or something else?
Well, in a way, but not under these circumstances. Because the people are dependent on the police. The problem is that the federal government shouldn't be involved. And under the Constitution, you could have local police, and I think there's a place for local police. But when it's directed by the government, then it becomes politicized, and we have the police being federal, and that's where the real problem is. And then the courts get corrupted, and it becomes a real menace. But I think most libertarians realize that, and I've done several programs on the militarization of the police. They're ending up with all the military equipment that our military needs to turn it loose so they can order more and help the military machinery, the industrial complex, to make more money. So these policemen end up with a lot of equipment they really don't need, except our society is getting more violent. But I think it should. It was intended under the Constitution that the police would be local and not federal. But now it is very much federalized one way or the other. Maybe not. The policemen carry, wear a United States uniform, but the FBI does, and the CIA is involved, and the judicial system is very much involved, much more than they want. So it is a federalized system, and we have a society right now that has a very confused attitude about, what justice is all about. And this whole thing, they get involved with trying to arrest somebody for hate crimes and punish them severely. That's usually federal laws and federal pressure that does that. So then that introduces the whole notions of what does the First Amendment mean and what is free speech all about. But right now there's a lot of confusion on this, and I don't think it's a surprise. I think it comes out of our universities, and I think that the young people are taught this. I think our school teachers come out of the universities and they have this confused attitude about law and order and justice and politics. And if you want to go back to really avoiding violence, you'd have to have a system where you don't have a welfare state and you don't have a warfare state, because it's violent to run a welfare state. The government says, oh, we'll take care of them. The government can do that, but they have to steal the money from somebody. They steal the money and they become the biggest criminals. Who are the biggest counterfeiters? It's the Federal Reserve. And people say, well, that's not stealing. The Federal Reserve doesn't steal any money. Yeah, they steal value from the money that you hold, and they steal money through taxation, and then they redistribute the wealth. So it is a system based on violence. So the government, is a very violent operation, and they're the ones who need their guns controlled. They carry too many guns, and they have too much illegal use of those guns internationally for sure, and also domestically. And to start off with, the emphasis should be on making policing activities local and getting rid of the penalties for nonviolent crimes.
Yeah, you talked about the way that the federal government gets involved here. I was thinking about George Floyd, the black man who died in Minneapolis. It was over, allegedly he passed a fake 20, and I thought that's what the Federal Reserve does all the time. They create counterfeited money, and they don't get their lives lost. They get bigger pensions and bigger paychecks, right?
That's a good point. And I make the point, and when I talk about this issue, that in 1792, the first monetary act was passed to design our monetary system after the Constitution was written. And they made it that gold and silver would be legal tender, and there would not be any paper money. And if you became a counterfeiter, a literal counterfeiter, they advocated that they could end up getting the death penalty. Wow. And I often thought, well, boy, that should send shivers down the spine of our central bankers, the Federal Reserve people, because that's all they do. They are counterfeiters. But it's a counterfeit system, and it's of course the size of government is a bad system. They have to pay for it, but we have to give up on that too. If we want a more sensible law enforcement operation, we have to have a complete revision of what the proper role of government ought to be. And right now, it's nothing related to what the founders tried to give us with the Constitution, because that hasn't worked out so well. And right now, the purpose is to get involved in social matters and medical matters and monetary matters and just about everything under the sun. And they're federal bureaucrats and politicians, and the main goal of a politician is to get reelected. So they commit a few crimes too when it comes to the redistribution of wealth and playing favors to certain individuals.
Now, it's 2020, and I remember seeing your movement rise when I was still in, college age, and, 2007 and 8 and so on. You had stadiums filled of college students. Do you think the fire for liberty is still such that, in a hypothetical scenario, you could still have rallies if you wanted to with that kind of interest from college students in 2020? Or do you believe that the message of liberty is not as fashionable right now in the minds of the youth?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag, because I come across as optimistic because there's a lot of people quietly like people who have radio stations and do interviews like this is what you do, David. You're contributing. And I have no idea. You have mentioned that I may have had a little bit of influence on you. And I don't know how many people you reach because you don't even know how many people
Right.
you reach. It's out there and there's a lot of it. And the internet is out there. And we do our program every day. And I just quietly do this without, measuring anything. We try to find out, but we get a lot of conversation from around the world, people interested. So it's a message that I used to talk when I was campaigning. If it's a message whose time has come, you can't stop it. Even armies can't stop, good ideas. Unfortunately, sometimes the armies are pushing bad ideas. So there's always a contest between the good and the evil. But I think there's a lot of good stuff out there, but it's not apparent because everything we hear about, whether what's been going on this last 6 months or so with coronavirus and police brutality and all these things that we don't see it. And the universities are so much responsible for all this nonsense, but there's a lot of education. We're all familiar, with the Mises Institute. I think they do great work. And I think ideologically, that is the answer. It isn't going to come by all of a sudden, us getting enough people that will change the votes in Congress. If they come anywhere close to coming up with a sensible vote, they'll probably be run out of town. But I think outside of Washington, outside the universities, the numbers are growing. But I think that right now, the campuses are more challenging than they were for me in 08 and 12, because I always felt, pretty good about it. But my approach there, when I knew it was a liberal campus, was as a libertarian, I can talk about, the terrible disadvantages to the average man in the middle class about Austrian economics, because the middle class gets wiped out. And that's what these so-called socialists are complaining about. But I think insincerely, because they just want to have a revolution and tear up America. But no, a decent progressive, I like to work with them because you can find them and they're anti-war and they're pro-civil liberties and they'll at least to be open. You take a person like Dennis Kucinich, we talked a lot and worked together, and he even, he's anti-Federal Reserve. So I think the reaching the intellectual progressive is a challenge for us and worthwhile, but not at what's going on now. I'm afraid, even though I thought I was treated very well, considering all things in these other two campaigns, but I think it would be a bigger challenge right now because I think the way the country's in worse shape, the country's bankrupt, people are angry, the media is more aggressive, and I think they sort of treated me, like mostly ignoring me, and getting by and not making a big fuss. But I think today, even the speeches I've given on campuses since I left office haven't gone badly. But I think the atmosphere is, I think about it, would be more challenging. Of course, right now we're not allowed to go out and talk because we can't get on airplanes or do anything else.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how these things change and how, there's this revolutionary zeal that runs through the current of American hearts and minds throughout different moments in our history. And unfortunately, it has a tendency to go toward populism and communist ideas when things are stagnating. And one of the things that we hear, like Peter Thiel is famous for saying that we haven't had real growth in wages since the 70s. We've petered off, so to speak, in our ability to create wealth. What is the issue behind that? Because a lot of people talk about it in conservative circles and left circles, saying we have a great stagnation. Now the communists come in and they say, well, that's because capitalism has created this stagnation. You would say the opposite. But what is it specifically about that era in the 1970s where all of a sudden it seems like we've kind of hit some slowdown in terms of real growth in wages?
And I think this is where conservatives and libertarians come up short because we literally complain about the same things the radical liberals say they believe in, but it isn't free markets that has caused these problems, but it's corporatism. That is the real problem because the corporations have been beneficial to the monetary system. And I think they dating this into the 70s because my whole political life was motivated by August 15th, 1971. And that was the day Nixon announced, surprisingly, on a Sunday night that we will not honor our commitment and try to protect the dollar at $35 an ounce. And that brought on havoc. And it was the time when I thought, wow, this is a big deal. And I had been studying Austrian economics before that, but this was dramatic. And I just thought to myself, things are going bad, will go bad from here. And even though we've gone these 50 years, and there's been a lot of people accumulate wealth, it's all been based on debt and funny money, the fiat system. So there's been a lot of accumulation of wealth, but real wealth, no. The real incomes are down. The people have suffered. There's more, the wealth has gravitated to the wealthy, and there's been more poor people out there. These are all issues that should attract a serious progressive or liberal who's concerned about the average person, because the system we have is truly not working very well. And I believe that if you had a true free market system, that we would be taking care of the middle class much better, because evidence shows that the freer a society, the larger the middle class is. And we once occupied that position, but that has gone in a different direction since 1971. And that is when the dollar became totally fiat and the government could print it at will. You didn't have to earn the money or save the money. You could just run up deficits constantly. And look, we live in an age now where it's totally dependent on deficit financing and continuing monetization of that debt to the point where, and the obligation to keep interest rates very low. We're at negative interest rates, printing like crazy, and still people are hanging in there thinking, well, it'll come back, but it isn't. Structurally, it has to be changed. And that's why it's so important. We continue to try to explain it in economic terms and also in the terms of morality with what individual liberty is all about.
So that great stagnation period since the 70s, in other words, we end the Bretton Woods system, and it creates this opportunity wherein the government can print unlimited credit, and then it creates this consumeristic based economy where we're not producing anything because you can flood Wall Street with easy money and they can get everybody addicted to debt, and therefore nobody has to make anything to enjoy this phony money, right? That's the way it works.
That's right. And it sounds good and looks good, and a lot of people benefit from it. And even the middle class, if you look at it as a general rule, there's been more wealth there, but it's all fake. It's a fiat money. It's fake news. It's fake economics. And the country is burdened with the consequence, and that is debt. And that's what's going on now. The market demands that the malinvestment and the debt be liquidated in order to get back to economic growth that we have experienced before. And everybody is just doing everything conceivable to, no, we'll patch it over, we'll patch it up, because they've been able to do that every time the market said, you got to back off and let a little bit of liquidation occur. But right now, nobody can tolerate that. The politician can't do that, because if you said, you know, like when a crisis comes up, I mean, of the last 6 months, if you're not for contributing trillions of dollars and all the bailout money that's happened already, yes, the conditions would have been really, really tough, but they might have been all behind us by now. But we're just, we haven't really liquidated or moved in the other direction, because we still endorse the whole principle that deficits don't matter and you have to print money in order to keep it together. And eventually everybody will go back to work. That's a fallacy. That's not going to happen.
So there's a popular movement in the intellectual circles of the right that says we need more tariffs. We need industrial policy to bring back the production capacity of America, to bring back small towns, to bring back industrial development. Would you say that perhaps a way that folks on the right who are for tariffs can work together with something like what you're saying, where you can say, hey, get rid of the federal income tax, stop taxing Americans, and replace that tax with a tax on foreign countries and foreign, companies?
Well, you'd think so, and up until recently, some did, but they're not going to do it, because they're frightened that it wouldn't be fast enough. So you have to look like you're doing something immediately. But the tariffs is, just a band-aid, and that's supposed to help. But yes, you could argue the case with true capitalism, true free markets, and true property rights, that that's what we need. And if you have free trade, then if somebody else makes products cheaper than we can, we should be able to buy them freely. But the big deal was this, back to the monetary system, that we were able to print the reserve currency of the world. Everybody takes it, they still do it. And therefore, as long as we do that, that gives us a special benefit. So we can just print the money and they take it, so we don't have to produce it. But if you had a true free market and sound money, yes, you don't want tariffs. What you want to do is be able to buy and sell. The consumer, it's their money. They should make their own mind. If they want to buy cheaper products, they should be able to do it at their own risk. But we should not try to patch up the mistakes that we have made here and the complications of a fiat currency, and that we'd have to unwind the benefits that we've had by being able to issue the reserve currency of the world. By being able to do that, we are the chief counterfeiter. And nobody wants to give that up, let alone Americans. So that's why the spending and the deficits are endorsed by our universities. At the same time, they're endorsed by our political leaders. There's not one side that says we should have spending and the other side opposed to it. I mean, all the budgets and all this going on and all the wars and all the interference that has happened is endorsed by the leadership of the Republicans and the Democrats. My claim is that we only have two problems there, Republicans and Democrats. And that's why a voice has to be heard about what freedom is all about, what liberty means, why the government should be very small, and the purpose of government ought to be to protect liberty, not to run our lives or police the world, and not to have a social justice system to tell people how they act and interfere with the freedom of speech and all these things. It's way overblown. So the purpose of government right now has very, very little to do with liberty. Matter of fact, it almost has to do with the opposite of liberty, because they've driven us into this bankruptcy.
Well, what would you say to folks who are on the right that say, yeah, I like a free market in theory, but when you have a Chinese government, if they're investing in Hollywood or businesses, NBA, and they end up using that investment as leverage to, try to create chaos culturally in America to get Americans at each other's throat, is that a bending of the free market that government should have a role in defending or protecting against?
That'll be a mixed bag, but what you want to do is try to figure out how you can get contracts to support this, because everything you say about what they might do here, we do over there. Right. I'm not the expert on this, but I believe if you're a businessman, you go to China and you want to set up, you actually agree that they will have access to what you're doing. It isn't like they just walked in the store and stole your records, that is. And then the other thing you have to consider, do we do that to them? We arrest Chinese people and say that, they've done such and such. And so we're not, we do the same thing to them. It's the same way with the military. We condemn the military, whether it's China or Iran or Russia, being so bad. But just look at what we did this past week. We had so many naval vessels over in the South China Sea, 3 aircraft carriers, and all this. And I keep thinking, well, what if the Chinese put all those kind of vessels in the Gulf of Mexico? Nobody thinks about that because we would be outraged by it. So the military aggression that we express, I think that on the trading business, it has to be done the best possible is to emphasize the contract. What are you going to agree to? And if they break the agreement, they should be vulnerable to the laws that protect against breaking contracts. Mm-hmm. I think, David, go ahead and ask another question or so, but I'll have to be leaving.
Sure. Well, I wanted to get your take. There's been a recent news that Kanye West wants to run for president. I wanted to get your take on that because he's talking about, we got to end mass incarceration, and whether he's running to be an educational campaign, kind of like how you were educating people as in a run. Do you, he mentioned, like, for example, that the 13th Amendment was tricky because it allowed for, imprisoning people. You could imprison people as a slave. You could still make them work. He said 13th Amendment basically legalized slavery in a backdoor, because it allows for you to enslave people who are incarcerated. Any take on that as someone who's studied the Constitution? Do you see something there?
Well, I don't know much about
Yeah.
Kanye, but no, we still follow enslavement because it's on the books that anytime they need one of our young people, you can be drafted into the military. I was drafted in the military. I was in the military for 5 years. So they enslaved me there, and it's on the books, and they won't think for a minute to get rid of the opportunity and ability to have the draft again. But no, I think that putting people in prison if they commit a violent crime, that should be permissible. It's just that there'd be very, very, very few federal crimes that you would do this for. And they list a couple in the Constitution, but and one of them it's counterfeiting. So but to imprison somebody if they've been committed of a murder, you can't equate that to slavery. I'd have to think your question through a little bit more.
Yeah, I don't think he means that being incarcerated for a violent crime is in slavery, but when they put people to work for 10 cents an hour in prison and they're in there for non-violent crimes, it's kind of a form of slavery, right?
So you don't have to deal with the second half of that. They shouldn't be in there,
right?
Right. Because they shouldn't be in prison. So yes, that makes it worse. But the big issue is why are you in there in the first place? And that would be our argument. And I think that there'd be a lot of liberals would agree with us on that. But sometimes our politics gets so terrible that the whole goal is it pro-Trump or anti-Trump? We hate Trump, so we have to do this. And it has nothing to do with the issue, and it has to do with partisanship. And yet I told you, I said the Republicans and Democrats on the big issues agree with each other. So what they're fighting is over power. So they will suffer the short-term consequences by putting people into prison if it makes the Republicans look bad. So that's unfortunate that's what it's all done. It's all a political game they play.
Well, I thank you for your time, Dr. Ron Paul, and I want people to check out your show, The Ron Paul Liberty Report, which is on every day, weekdays, live. You can watch it on YouTube or ronpaullibertyreport.com. And just want to remind folks that I think your message that if there is no victim, there should be no crime is a winning issue that can unite a lot of Americans from various angry, perspectives. They can unite around that. And I think it would really heal a lot of the tensions in our country. So
yeah,
I appreciate you advancing that message.
And just let me conclude that, because the principle is that you can't protect people from hurting themselves. But a lot of the people who want to intercede, they say you shouldn't do that because you're going to hurt yourself. Well, in a free society, you can't do that. You can't protect the person from doing that. Otherwise, you have no liberty left. Well, once again, David, thanks for having me on.
Thank you. I appreciate it.